Hi everyone, welcome back. Hi, I'm Garima. I'm consultant in ThoughtWorks, and Akhilesh, you wanna introduce us?
Hi everyone, I'm Akhilesh Tiwari, and I'm senior consultant with ThoughtWorks, having 7 years of experience into front-end technologies.
So today we'll talk about why Reactive Forms. There are many libraries present in the market solving the same problem, but why Reactive Forms? Our main focus will be around this topic only. Now let's start. So for the next 40 or 50 minutes, we will be talking about some of the introduction to reactive forms, then brushing up the basic concepts about controlled and uncontrolled components. Then what advantage does reactive form gives me? Or the comparison between the formic and the redux form. These two libraries are basically similar to reactive form. Introduction to the basics. UseForm is actually an API that reactive form gives us, in which we have register, watch, and control. At the end, we will practice some of the examples with validations, with custom resolvers, with schema validations using YAP. YAP is actually a third-party library that we are using here. We'll talk about use field array, UseFormContext. These two are the APIs that I received from hooks only, and integrating with the third-party libraries. Suppose in case you have a scenario, you want to have ANT components or you want to have your material UI components. So how does it behave with reactive forms? Then we'll have the UseWatch. Okay, so yes. The main pain area for handling form or inputs is actually a common thing that we all focus on, right? But reactive form gives me a very variety and a rich application, a rich API, actually complete APIs that handles this particular problem with very ease. And you can install the reactive form with one simple npm command, that is npm install reactive form. It's a very self-composed library, right? It's a very light in size. The bundle size is very small. So let's brushen up the control components. So what are the control components? Basically, a control component is one. When I change anything by the form inputs, my state changes, right? So basically, once your component is in charge of handling the state, it's a controlled component. And instead of uncontrolled components where we need to fetch the value by querying the DOM elements, it's somewhere different. As you can see in the screenshot as well on the right, we have the state, this email and set email, and with the input component here, the soon as I change the input, soon as I start typing, my state will change for the component. So basically this is the controlled one. And if I go to the uncontrolled component, it's the one where the DOM is in the charge, right? And if I need to access, I need to query the DOM, and then I can get the value. As you can see here, the input ref, we have used one with null right now. And if I want to have the value, I can extract it from the ref. Now, why React hook forms? So these are the basic points, the basic advantage that React hook form gives me. The first one is reducing the re-renders. This is a very basic problem that every library faces, right? Once you start typing in any of the input fields, it starts re-rendering the entire form, but it does not happen with React hook form. So let's see how. So here I have a very simple form with a first name, last name, and a drop down and a submit button. You can see the render count is 1 right now because it's the first time the form is being rendered. We'll talk about code later. Let's first understand the behavior. Now, if I start typing anything, you see my render count still remains 1. It does not increment anywhere, right? And even if I start for last name, I select a drop down, anything, it doesn't change. Let's click on submit first and see what happens. I type this. Right now my render count changes, right? So why does it changes to 2? Because on the click of on submit, like the submit button here, you can see on line number 8, I am setting the state. So as soon my state of the component changes, my entire form re-renders, right? So basically it's a controlled one right now. I can do one thing. I can just go ahead and have a console. And if it is the console, you will see that run account does not change. It will still remain the one. So,
Garima, there is a request. Can you zoom in a bit?
sure. Zoom as in, okay. Is it visible?
Yes, it is.
Okay. So the render count still is one, right? If you have used your formic or any of Redux form libraries, the count changes as soon as you start typing in the text field, right? Suppose if this is 6 character, the render count would have been 6. Now let's go back to the okay, I'll just zoom out once and then go back and zoom in. Okay, somehow, yeah, no, it's fine. Is it visible with this zoom? Okay, I hope it's visible then. Now let's see the code. I have a very simple form here. On the click of submit button, I am calling one callback. That is, I'm actually handling the callback with the submit function here, right here. And you see this handle submit and this register. These are the two callbacks that I received from UseForm API. Register is responsible for binding the inputs with the form, and you actually pass a very unique key here. And this unique key, whatever you pass here, will be used to generate the form data. If you see in the console, I can go to console once. See what kind of data I receive. I receive first name, last name, and category, and these keys are the one that I provided with register itself. Register is actually capable of handling other functionalities like validations. We'll see in the later slides. And yes, that's it for the simple thing. Now I'll zoom out and go back to. So next point that comes with as an advantage with Reactive Form is the super light functionality. Because the size is very small, the bundle size is very small. It does not hamper your performance on the basis of size. It isolates the re-renders. So what does this isolation mean? Suppose there is a nested component having one parent and multiple child components, then as soon as your parent re-renders, the child start to re-renders. In the case of control components, right? As soon as the props changes, the re-render fired. Reactive Form actually have a very a very beautiful thing to handle these isolating thing, right? Isolating the parent and the child components. We'll see in the later slides how. You write very less code and have very high performance, because for validations, for performance in case of isolating the re-renders, Reactive Form handles very beautifully. And you have the subscriptions. If you want to have your form state, if you want to have any one of the field of the form itself, you can subscribe to it. And once you subscribe, if there are any processing that you want to do on the basis of it, you can do easily. The HTML markups that can be applied as a part of validations, you can perform them very easily. Developer experience, UI experience, both are seamless. So let's go to the next one. So you see, there is something is typing in the Reactive Form and something is typing in the controlled one. The soon you type in Reactive Form, the child component do not re-render, but in case of controlled form, you see, the child component re-renders. So that's how the isolation is done for Reactive Forms. Now I'll ask Akhilesh to please take over. I'll stop sharing my screen for the next topic.
Thanks a lot, Garima. So guys, let's talk about the comparison of Reactive Forms with its alternatives present in the market. So these are the two famous alternatives. One is Formic, one is Redux Form, and both have big community. They are flexible libraries, famous ones. So let's start with the size comparison. So the first one is Reactive Form is lighter in size. As you can see, its gzip size is 8.3 KB, and it's a self-contained library with no dependencies. So as you can see in the composition itself, it's 100% self-code, no dependencies. As compared to Redux Form, whose size is 26.3 KB, and it's dependent on some util libraries called Lodash. same as in case of forming. So let's talk about the performance comparison. As you can see in the reactive form, as the user start typing inside the components, you can see re-rendering is not happening again and again. But in case of formic, as soon as the user is typing on each and every keystroke, re-rendering is happening. So why this is so? Let's see this example in real life. So in this example, what we have done, we have created two forms, one using reactive form and one using formic. So let's check out the code. So I'm getting this hook from the from the reactive form, use form, and from the forming, I'm getting use formic. So this form we have created using reactive form, and this one is using the formic. And in the starting, I'm taking a reference and with a value of 0. And with each re-rendering, I'm incrementing the counter here. So let's see how a reactive form performs and how it is different from forming. So as soon as I start typing, you can see the rendering is only one times. It's not getting re-render again and again because it's an uncontrolled component. So as Garima stated in the earlier slides, so it's the reactive form is getting the value from the references using the default behavior of HTML. But in case of control components on each and every keystroke, you would see that it's going to re-render multiple times. So this is what's the difference between reactive form and forming in case of coupling. So here we can see I have created this input using this register function, which I got from the use form, and which I got from reactive form. So with this, what we are doing here, we are spreading the register function over here, which will return us some events and references and the values, which is going to bind it with this component. So same in case of formic, it gives us object in invocation of use formic, and by using that, we are manually binding the value and we are manually binding the function here. And that's how we have created these two forms. And performance wise, you can see reactive form is a clear winner here. So the next thing is the mounting time. So in case of Formio with same set of components, the formic is taking 2070 milliseconds, but reactive form is taking 1800 milliseconds, and it's going to mount only once, whereas formic is going to mount for 6 times. So that's it for the comparison. So let's talk about the 6 APIs with reactive form offers. The first one is use form. So this hook helps in managing our form. Usually it almost gives us everything. Invoking this will provide us with methods like register, control, watch, and other functionalities which helps in handling the forms easily. The next one is use controller. So what it does is it helps us in creating the reusable controlled components, and we will see some examples in the future slides regarding the same. The next one is use form context. So let's suppose you are creating a complex form, and there are some child components which are getting rendered into the nested structures. So there you're going to need the form context. And in order to provide the form context, you will need this hook. We'll see an example in the future slide. UseWatch, it helps in isolate re-renders on the form level. And we're going to use it for the performance, and we'll see some example regarding the same. Use form state will give us the form state and the field state. Field state, for example, if the field is dirty or has been touched, then it gives the full information regarding the field state and the form state. So the whole form state is available, on the basis of which you can make some decisions. And use field array, if you are creating some dynamic uncontrolled field arrays, for example, some lists or some tables. So in that scenario, this would come into a picture, and it plays an important part. It provides us some methods like append, prepend, remove, insert, swap, move. Using that, you can create dynamic list, and you can play with them. So now I'll switch with Garima, who's going to elaborate more on the APIs part. So, Garima,
Yeah,
you can
I
share.
am Akhilesh. I'll start sharing my screen. So the next thing that we'll discuss is use form. And you can use this thing as with TypeScript or without TypeScript. So as you can see easily in the screenshot, we have one type as form inputs with the first name and last name. And as soon as you specify that my use form will only handle my form inputs, that means it will understand that it's expecting the first name and last name and string only. Other than this, it will complain you for errors. So now you have some of the params that you pass with the use form, saying mode and revalidate mode, default values, resolvers, context, criteria mode, and other things as well. So let's dive into this. So what is use form? Use form is actually one hook that is here to help us in managing the form itself. It provides us register or handle submit, as you have already seen in the previous example. Watch, you can watch for subscribing for one particular form field. You have control as well. So control is for the components. For the uncontrolled components, you want them to wrap into one parent component and make them reusable ones. So let's first understand the default params that we pass in the use form. Let's start with the mode one. So this option allows you to actually make your component a controlled one or an uncontrolled one in some manner. And the default value is on submit. So your validation starts as soon as you click on the submit button for the form, right? If you want your validation to be dynamic, like as soon as you start typing, your validation should trigger, then you can use the on change, though it's kind of heavy on the performance. Then you can have the on blur, you can have on submit, as I already talked about. Revalidation mode. So suppose you have click on the on submit button, your form is being validated, and one of the field fails for the validation, right? Now your revalidate mode comes into play. Now the field which fails for the validation is now going to be revalidated again, because the user is going to type again and it's going to revalidate. So this revalidation mode can be on change, it can be on blur, as similar to the mode one. Generally, when you have clicked on the on submit button for the first time, on submit button, the on change callback is actually attached to every field in the form itself, so that as if any field fails, the revalidation starts going on. There are some default values that you can provide to the reactive forms. This default value is actually for the first time when you render your form and you want the value to just pop up with the box or with the drop down, then this can be used. And one more thing is, suppose you want to change, suppose you start ahead and change the values of the form, and there are some fields that is being changed, tagged as dirty. So basically it compares first with the default values. If they are in the reactive form, compares with the default ones first. Yes, now the resolver. So what the basic use of this is for validations. Suppose you have a business requirement that your form is complex and you want to validate it against your own schemas. Then you have two options. You can use your custom schemas. You can use your third-party library. In the further examples, we will be talking about Tiap, but there are other as well, like Zode and Zoe, etc. Let's go back. Let's go ahead and with yes. Now the register thing that we get from the register callback that we get from use form itself. You have seen in the previous example how register works. So it gives me on change, on blur, name, and ref. These four things that gets bind with my component like input and select. So as soon as there is a change, as soon as there is on blur event, as soon as something, register is in charge to handle everything right now. You pass a unique name and it will bind the inputs and the forms, and it bind every callback and every event. Now let's see one example. Now let's practice some of the form ones. Let's start with validations first. Okay, so we have a very simple form here with the first name, last name, age, and submit button. Now, let's first understand the behavior, how it's working. If I click on submit, it will complain me that this field is required because as you can see on line number 25, I said this field is required and the maximum length I expect it to be 20. It should not exceed by 20 and the pattern is all characters. So, and so what is this thing, this entire object that I'm passing here in register? This are actually the rules. So if you look into the Reactive Form doc, you'll see that register is capable of receiving rules against which you can validate your form. If in case your validation fails for a particular field, the error will go to the form state like this, right? And this error message, you can configure on your own. If there are any error message for the first name with the type required, then my message will be this field is required. If there is a error for max length, you can configure your message. If there is an error for pattern, you can configure for this one as well. Now, if I go ahead and just clear this thing, its first name is done. There is one validation for age, like minimum should be 18 or maximum should be 99. You can configure on your own. And if I click on submit, my form is being submitted because the only required field was the first name. You see, the data is like first name this, last name I don't provide, age I didn't provide, and that's how my form is validated. Now let's go back to GPT. So you can do validations by one other method, that is the custom resolver. Let's see. So the first point to notice here is, let's go to the code first because the form is very much similar. I have not provided any rules with register itself, right? What I did instead, I just created one resolver, right? Saying that my first name is required. And if this thing fails, this validation fails, your error type should be required and the message is this. And this is being passed in the optional parameters for the use form, right? Now, my validations against the rules will be handled by resolver itself. And the error will still go to the form state. If I go up, yes, the error will still go to the form state and the error message are still configured right this way. So if there is an error for first name, then show me, and like, yes, there is any message, then please show that, else not. So it's just the same thing, only different implementation. And let's go back to GPT. One more way is to have it with a third-party library. We are using Yup. Right. So it's the same one, right? The form is same, just one or more new fields. So let's understand this thing. Right now, what I'm doing, I am having on line number 9, I'm having a schema, right? I'm saying, and I'm using the functional, the chaining methods. And the first name says that, okay, I should be a string and I should be the required field, right? You cannot have me as null. Age is saying that, okay, I will be a number, I will be a required field, I will be positive thing because age is not negative at all, and I will be integer. I'm not entertaining any float values. So website is saying that, okay, I'll be string and URL. And you can customize your messages by passing, okay, if I go for like positive, I can say that positive number, right? And suppose if I go ahead and type -9, age should be a positive number. So the only difference is the implementation part. It's more crisp and more clear. You just specify one schema and then you just go ahead and pass it to the resolver. We are using Yup resolver here to actually return me a resolver that I can pass in the optional parameters for use form. Now, the error messages are being rendered in the same way. It's just the part where the validation is being checked against the roots, which is now being handled by use form. So let's go back. Now, last one is handling form with TypeScript. Okay, so let's first understand the right part of the screen. We have a pizza demo application. Here I am having one table with some toppings and some additional toppings, and you can go ahead and type one more other thing, saying mushroom, and this. So this is the general behavior of how this thing works. Now let's go back to the code part. Okay. Now I am having one interface saying that, okay, it's a create topping modal props, saying one Boolean value, one callback, and then there is one submit. And I expect two things like topping one name and additional topping name, as you have already seen in the input boxes, right? And I expect the same thing to get returned from it. Now let's go back to the component. I can actually just do like this here. Now let's go back to the component, that is create topping modal, right? So I have said that please create a component with this interface stating all the conditions that will be applied, because I have one interface according to it. Now let's understand. I have 3 unique IDs for topping name, modal, heading, and one for topping one name. This is a simple modal with a header 1, and my form starts here. Handle submit coming from UseForm, as we have already seen in the previous ones. On submit is the one that I have created, and it just say that, okay, your value has been created, and there will be a pop-up like you have seen previously. Now let's go back. So this controller, this is the one part which is actually a good one to look into. I will not go deep into the controller one because it will be handled the next slide. So let's understand this controller. Right now we are using the Reactive Form 16th version. If you could have used the earlier one, you don't need to type as, or just specify like this. You'll see in the latest slides how the latest version works for it. So this controller, what it does, it actually a wrapper around the input box. The input box for what? Topping on name. This topping, right? Now I have specified my rules that this field is required and the minimum length will be 2. If there is any validation errors, this thing will handle them and pop up the messages as well. The second one is for the second topping input box, and this is how it's being handled. So basically it's just an example to understand how my TypeScript works with reactive forms. Right? Now let's go back to my. So I'll stop share. I'll ask Akhilesh to please take over from here.
Thanks a lot, Garima. So let me take it from here. So guys, let's continue with the practice exercises, and let's talk about the first example, which is UseFormContext. So this hook is very useful when you are creating complex form structures. For example, there is a form and there is a scenario where you have components which are deeply nested inside your form. So either you can manually pass all the props to each and every components. Like in this example, I have given only 2 components. One is input and one is the test component. But there could be 20 components or maybe 25 components in your form. So either you can manually pass the props to each and every component, or what you could do, you could use form provider. Form provider, it's an API provided by Reactive Form, which is based on context API. So what we are doing here is, after invoking UseForm, I am getting this method object. From method, as you know, in the earlier slides, we have already mentioned, we get methods like register, control, watch, and everything in this. So I'm spreading everything inside this form provider, and it's going to, so all these methods will be provided to each and every component which is going to render inside this form. So this is kind of wrapper. It's going to provide all these methods to all the components which going to render inside this form provider. Now, if there is a context, if this is using context API, so if this is provider, there should be a consumer. Now inside this test component, you will see this consumer. This is the UseFormContext, which I'm getting from Reactive Form. So this will provide me with all the methods which use from which we're going to pass as prof. If you're going to inject everything, we're going to inject manually to each and every component, so we can get those properties automatically from this context. So what I'm going to do here, I'm going to spread this inside this input component, and it's going to bind all the properties, and it's going to control everything from here. So this is how in the complex structure, in the deeply nested structure, we can get the form context anywhere, and we can create reusable components using the same. So in this scenario also, I will type something, I will submit, and it's going to provide me with the submission object with the key value pairs, as you can see. So this is a handy example for UseFormContext. So now let's talk about use filled array. So as I mentioned earlier, the earlier slides, this hook is useful when we have to create some dynamic uncontrolled component list or tables. So in this example is regarding a list. So here I'm creating a list in which I'm creating a form in each and every list item. So there are two input boxes in which you can enter some information, and you can delete this row, you can append a new row, you can prepend a new row, you can insert, swap, move, remove, and reset. So these all methods I'm getting from use filled array. So as you can see, I'm getting all these methods from this use filled array method, and use filled array I'm getting from Reactive Form here. So let's go down and check the code. So as you can see in the list, I am rendering an input component. So you can create components using either using register or using the controller. So it's the same thing, but in case of controller, I'm going to give one more example how it is different from the register. So in this scenario, when I'm going to press append, it's going to append this object in the list. So as you can see, I'm already providing the default values here, the first name and last name. Same goes for prepend. It's going to prepend a row before this table, and I'm already giving some value. So likewise, insert going to insert at the second index directly. So it's an example. That's why I'm not providing any dynamic value. I provided static values, how these things work. So like in case of append, you'll see it's going to append a row. I'm going to prepend. It's going to prepend at the first level, and insert going to insert at the second index 0, 1, 2. So after that, it's going to insert a new row. So like here at this index. So I'm going to swap the rows at 1 and 2. So like at index 1 and 2 is going to swap these two values. So as you can see, it swapped it, and going to move it from index 1 to 2 like this, and remove. If you provide any index, it's going to remove that value from that particular index, or remove it, going to remove it from the index 1 where I provided it a static value of 1. And reset, I'm passing a blank array here, so it's going to reset the whole form instantly. So if you want to create, if you want to handle some kind of list or a list of uncontrolled arrays, you can use filled array. It's a very handy hook which you can use in this scenario. So let's talk about integrating with third-party library. It's a very important exercise. So when we create forms, we make use of several libraries like Material UI, or maybe React Select, or Tailwind CSS, or Bootstrap components. All these are third-party libraries. Most of the libraries provide deals into controlled components. That means their components are controlled on the basis of state. So on each and every keystroke, they are the on-change event gets triggered and the state will get set. So that's going to hamper the whole form performance So in order to control that, and in order to integrate with the third-party components, we have a wrapper called controller, which we get from the reactive form. So what this controller does is, it's going to wrap around the third-party component. For example, in this scenario, I am wrapping the React select, which is a third-party component. It's a very useful library. Please refer the documentation of this. And inside this, I'm rendering. I get this render method, which will give me this field attribute. So inside this field, I'll get the events like on change, on blur, value, and reference. So I'm spreading everything over here, which will bind everything with this component attributes, and it's going to control it on the basis of that. Plus, this controller, what it does is, it's going to render this component and control its re-renders in its code. So it's not going to hamper the form level performance. So whenever the re-rendering happens, it's going to happen inside this controller wrapper scope itself, because it's a control component. So in this scenario also, this wrapper would not allow this third-party library to hamper the performance of the whole form. So likewise, we are integrating it with the React date picker. So here, if you want to manually inject or manually bind the values separately instead of spreading it like this, so you can do that here. Like for example, I'm binding the on change event with the on change event, and I'm passing the value in the selected attribute. So likewise, we have created other components like number format, downshift, draft example, input mask. So let's see how these things work. So whenever I'm making changes into the form, you'll see this will not change as these are uncontrolled components. So of course, the form not going to re-render. So I'm going to enter some values here, and at last I'm going to press submit, which will give me this huge submission object. For each and every unique key, there is a value, and this unique key, as Garima mentioned it earlier, we have to pass it inside the register, or maybe if we are using controller here, we have to give name property to each and every component, so that the state would be managed by reactive form automatically. So let's see other example, which is based on UseWatch. So UseWatch is something which helps us in isolate re-renders. So let's see a real life example in this scenario. So here what we are doing, we have created a child component, which is this one, and we have created a parent component. So what UseWatch does is, it helps in isolating the re-render on the component level, not on the form level, on the component level. So what is that? Let's talk about that. So on line number 23, I'm initializing a variable with value 0. On each and every re-render of this component, I'm going to increment its value. So I'm putting a watch on this first name component. So whenever I'll change something here, I'm putting a watch using the UseWatch. So whenever I make changes into this component, this parent components will get re-rendered. And same I have done into the child component. This is a child component, which is this one. And what I'm doing here is, I'm putting a watch on the last name here. So whenever I'll make changes into this last name component, the child component will get re-rendered. So for example, I'm putting something here, and you can see only the parent component is getting re-rendered. And if I'll make changes into the child component, only the child component is getting re-rendered. So here we are also making use of memo, as you can see. If this would be a simple child component, if we haven't memoized it, then when the parent component get re-rendered, this child component will also get re-rendered. So that would be inefficient. So in order to make efficient component, we created, we memoized this component, so that if I am making change into this component, only parent component would re-render, but child component would not get re-rendered, because the props haven't been changed for this one. So this is an example of how isolate re-rendering works into Reactive Form. Now let's talk about the highlights. So it's Reactive Form. It was a winner of a 2020 Git Nation React OS Award, and the project is also fortunate enough to be under the radar for the languages and framework section. So in conclusion, we would say that Reactive Form is a very light size and highly performant libraries as compared to its alternatives which are present in the market right now. It's the most efficient library right now. And in terms of validations too, we would encourage you to use third-party library like uh, we have seen the Yup library example because it increases the maintainability of code and we don't have to and more readability so that we don't have to add any kind of cumbersome code in between the components like errors and first name like that. So it's going to handle everything on its own and it's going to throw some error messages. It's fun to use library. Please give it a try. Okay, that's it folks. So let's have some questions. You can ask some questions right now.
Thank you, Akhilesh. So folks, like we will be having around 10 to 15 minutes of break, and we will be combining question and answer session with that. So if anybody have any question, like they can raise your hand. So I will allow you to speak here, and maybe you can interact with our panelists. So I think next session will be beginning at 5:10. Yeah.